Let's get something out of the way immediately. You've heard the explanation. You probably believe part of it. Younger women choose older men for money, for security, for resources. It's transactional. It's shallow. It's gold digging dressed up in polite language. That's the narrative. That's what people say when they want to reduce a complex pattern to something simple enough to dismiss. And here's the truth: that explanation is lazy, it's incomplete, and it misses almost everything that's actually happening. If it were purely about money, any wealthy young man would dominate. The 28-year-old tech founder with 9 figures in the bank would be winning every time against the 50-year-old executive. But that's not consistently what happens. The pattern of younger women being drawn to significantly older men persists across economic categories, across cultures, across contexts where money is not the differentiating variable, which means money is not the variable, or at least not the primary one. What younger women are selecting when they choose older men is not age. Age is just the container. What they're actually selecting is what age tends to produce in men who have used their time well. They are selecting for a set of qualities, a specific internal architecture, a way of carrying oneself in the world that chronological experience often develops, but does not automatically generate. Today we're going to go through the real structural and psychological dynamics behind this pattern, not to validate it or critique it, but to understand it clearly. Because understanding it tells you something true and useful about what actually drives attraction, about what actually signals value, and about what any man can develop regardless of the number on his birth certificate. Pay attention. This is more layered than you think. Let's start with the foundational principle, because everything else builds on it. Age, when paired with competence, signals stability. And stability is one of the most powerful selection criteria in any serious mating decision. Here's what stability actually means in this context. It doesn't mean boring. It doesn't mean static. It doesn't mean a man who has stopped growing or taking risks. Stability means that the fundamentals of who he is are no longer in flux. His identity is established. His emotional regulation is developed. His relationship with himself is settled enough that external turbulence doesn't collapse it. The emotional control piece is significant. An older man who has accumulated real experience has typically been through enough difficulty to have developed some relationship with his own emotional responses. He has been through professional failure and found his way back. He has been through relationship breakdowns and processed them. He has been tested in environments where emotional reactivity produced bad outcomes, and he learned, through experience, to manage it. That management is visible. It shows in how he handles conflict, how he responds to pressure, how he moves through social environments without needing constant external validation. The financial grounding component is real, but it's not about the amount. It's about the relationship with money. An older man who has managed his finances over decades has usually developed a different relationship with resources than a younger man who is still in the acquisition phase. He is less erratic, less reactive to market conditions in his personal spending, less performing of wealth and more living within a structure that wealth has allowed him to build. The stability of that relationship reads differently than the flash of new money trying to prove itself. Social positioning matters too, not as status performance, but as the evidence of accumulated credibility. An older man who has built genuine relationships over decades, who has a professional network of people who have seen him operate across time, who carries a reputation that precedes him, occupies a social position that has been tested and is held. That position communicates something about who he actually is, because it was built over enough time that it cannot easily be faked. And decision-making clarity. This is underrated as an attraction signal. A man who has made enough consequential decisions, who has developed the capacity to assess a situation and commit to a direction without excessive deliberation or need for external approval, who can lead from a place of informed conviction rather than anxiety, reads as capable, as trustworthy, as someone who can navigate what's ahead rather than just reacting to it, potential versus proven. That binary is at the heart of this dynamic. A younger man, regardless of his raw talent or his ambitions, is still largely a projection. He is what he might become. An older man with real accomplishment is what he has become. And in uncertain environments, in a world where the future is genuinely unclear, proven beats potential. Because potential could fail to materialize. Evidence doesn't have to be projected. It's already there. Let's bring in the evolutionary lens, because this pattern did not emerge in the last 20 years. It runs much deeper than modern dating culture. From a biological standpoint, male and female long-term mating strategies are not symmetrical. They evolved under different selection pressures, and they optimize for different outcomes. This is not a value judgment. It is a description of evolutionary history. Women's long-term mating strategy has historically involved a higher degree of selectivity around resource provision and environmental security. Not because women are mercenary, but because the biological investment of reproduction and child rearing has always been disproportionate on the female side. The time, the physical cost, the period of reduced mobility and vulnerability, all of that historically required that the environment be secure enough for the investment to pay off. And so the female brain, over evolutionary time, developed significant sensitivity to signals of resource reliability, environmental stability, and the likelihood that a partner would remain invested and capable over time. An older man who has accumulated resources and demonstrated stability is, in this evolutionary framework, running a high-quality signal. Not because he's old, but because he has survived long enough and successfully enough to have built the things he's built. In the ancestral environment, that was genuinely informative data about his capability. This is not gold digging. That framing gets it wrong. Gold digging implies conscious calculation, implies a woman explicitly trading youth for resources in a transaction she's aware of. What's actually happening, in many cases, operates below the level of conscious decision-making. The brain is reading cues. It is evaluating stability signals against instability signals. It is running a risk assessment that the woman herself may not be fully aware of. The feeling she experiences is not a calculation. It is attraction. But the attraction has been shaped by evolutionary pressures that have nothing to do with the individual or her conscious preferences. Stability reduces uncertainty. In uncertain environments, certainty becomes more valuable. And a man who can provide a stable, emotional, and material environment is reducing a form of existential uncertainty that the female brain is specifically wired to evaluate. This does not mean the pattern is inevitable or universal. Individual differences are enormous. Socialization matters. Specific experiences matter. But the underlying pressure is real, and it is old. Understanding it is not about reducing women to biology. It's about recognizing that the impulses behind human behavior have layers, and the surface layer is rarely the only layer that's operating. Let's talk about emotional maturity, because this is where the most visible, day-to-day difference between older and younger men tends to show up. Here's an honest description of where most men are in their 20s. They are still building identity. They're still figuring out who they are in relation to their work, their relationships, their values, their position in the world. They are in the exploration phase. And exploration is necessary and valuable, but it creates a specific kind of internal environment. A man who is still figuring out who he is will inevitably run some of that uncertainty through his relationships. He will look to the relationship for validation of who he is. He will be more volatile in his sense of self, more susceptible to having his mood and self perception destabilized by how the relationship is going at any given moment. This is not a flaw, it is a developmental stage, but it creates a relational experience that has a specific quality. The woman feels in some way like she is participating in his identity formation, like her role includes being part of the mirror he uses to figure out who he is. And while that can be meaningful in the short term, it places a specific kind of burden on the relationship. It means his emotional state is more dependent on what's happening between them. It means he is less able to be a stable presence when she herself is in difficulty, because he's still navigating his own construction. An older man who has moved through that phase, who has arrived at some settled sense of who he is and what he values, occupies a different position. He has consolidated. He knows at a reasonably fundamental level what he thinks about things, what kind of man he is, what his commitments are. This does not mean he has stopped growing, but the floor of who he is established, and that floor is not easily shaken by external events. The experience of being with a man who has this kind of settled identity is qualitatively different. He is more predictable in the best sense, more readable, more reliable in his sense of self. When things are difficult, he is still there, the same person, not destabilized, not reconsidering his entire identity. Present in a way that requires no management. Identity, clarity creates attraction, gravity. Because a person who knows who they are draws other people toward them. There is something orienting about being around someone who is settled enough in themselves that they don't need you to complete the picture. It creates safety. It creates the sense that the ground beneath the relationship is solid, that the person you're with is not going to shift into something unrecognizable the next time the environment gets challenging. Now let's talk about confidence, because confidence gets used as a catch-all term, and it's worth being specific about what kind of confidence we're actually discussing here. There are different types of confidence. There's the confidence of someone who has just convinced themselves they're impressive and is hoping the performance lands. There is the confidence of someone who has had a few successes and is riding that wave, still slightly afraid of what happens when the wave ends. And there is the confidence that comes from having actually been tested, from having gone through genuine difficulty and uncertainty and failure, and having come out the other side with your sense of yourself intact. Those three types feel completely different to the people around you. The confidence that older men at their best carry is the third type. It is not performed. It does not require an audience. It does not depend on constant external confirmation that it's real. It is the natural byproduct of having built something, lost something, rebuilt, navigated enough varied territory that you know your own capacity in a way that cannot be argued away by a single bad day. This kind of confidence produces specific behavioral qualities that register as attractive. Less reactivity. A man who is genuinely confident does not get destabilized by social friction. He does not need to assert his status constantly because his status is not in question in his own mind. He does not rise to every challenge or respond to every provocation. He can sit with discomfort without it producing visible distress. He can be challenged without it feeling like an attack on who he fundamentally is, less validation seeking. The man who is still building his confidence checks for external signals of his worth constantly. He monitors how people respond to him. He adjusts his behavior based on whether he's getting approval or not. He needs the confirmation loop running at high frequency. The man who has settled into earned confidence doesn't need that loop. He already has the internal data. He knows what he's capable of because he's watched himself be capable of it repeatedly over time. More grounded, his emotional center of gravity is lower, more stable, less subject to being thrown by what's happening on the surface. This groundedness is felt by the people around him. It creates a sense of solidity, a sense that there is weight and depth behind the exterior, that you are not just interacting with a presentation, but with a person who actually exists all the way down. The binary of trying to impress versus not needing to. This distinction, more than almost any other behavioral signal, separates the confidence that attracts from the performance that doesn't. The man who is trying to impress communicates that your approval is required for his self-image to hold. The man who is not trying to impress communicates that his self-image is self-contained, that he is presenting himself honestly, and you can take it or leave it, and either outcome is fine. Non-neediness amplifies value, because need is visible, and visible need is a status signal, just not the kind anyone wants to send. Here's a piece of the dynamic that is very much about the specific cultural moment we're in, and it's worth spending real time on it. Younger women today, women in their early to mid-20s, are navigating a social environment that would have been unrecognizable even 20 years ago. The attention economy is total. Every platform is optimized to produce maximum engagement through maximum emotional activation. Every man competing for romantic attention on those platforms is, to some degree, performing, optimizing his presentation, managing his image, running his personal brand as a strategic operation. Performative masculinity is everywhere. The aggression and bravado that social media rewards, the lifestyle presentation that is curated to create envy and desire rather than actual connection, the posturing and positioning and competitive signaling that happen in the comment sections and the DMs and the group chats. It's exhausting to watch. It's more exhausting to be the recipient of. Add to that the inconsistency, the hot and cold communication patterns that come from men who are running too many simultaneous options, who are managing multiple connections and giving none of them full attention, who are hedging their emotional investment because commitment feels like loss of leverage. The younger woman navigating this environment receives an enormous volume of attention, almost all of it performed, almost none of it stable, almost none of it genuine in the way that genuine feels. Against that backdrop, an older man who is direct, who communicates clearly, who does not play games because he is past the phase of life where games felt like strategy, who knows what he wants and says so without excessive hedging or performance, who is not competing for status on social media because his status is not established on social media. That man reads as a different category of experience entirely. Clarity feels rare in chaotic markets. That is an economic metaphor, but it applies precisely. When every signal in the environment is noisy, when every interaction requires decoding for manipulation or performance or hidden agenda, genuine directness is not just appealing. It is almost shocking in its contrast. The older man who says what he means and means what he says stands out not because he has performed scarcity, but because he is genuinely scarce in that market. The reduced drama component is significant too. Men who are past the identity building phase, who are not running competitive status games with their peer group, who do not have the same investment in proving themselves through romantic conquest, simply produce less of the specific kind of drama that makes younger dating environments exhausting. Not because they're inert, but because the things they're competing for are different. The theater of young male competition has largely receded, and what's left is just a person with a life engaging with you directly. There's a leadership dimension to this that deserves its own examination, because leadership, as an attraction signal, is often misunderstood. Leadership in this context doesn't mean domination. It doesn't mean control. It doesn't mean a man who overrides your preferences and makes all the decisions and expects compliance. That's not leadership. That's ego wearing a leadership costume. Real leadership in a relational context looks like this. He leads conversations, not by dominating them, but by having enough internal confidence to set a direction and hold it. He can initiate. He can drive toward a point without losing the thread. He can engage with ideas and push back intelligently and keep the conversation moving rather than waiting for you to carry it. He plans decisively. When he suggests something, there's a plan attached to the suggestion, not a vague gesture toward maybe doing something sometime. A specific time, a specific place, a specific intention. This sounds like a small thing. It is not a small thing. The man who can make a decision and execute on it without excessive deliberation communicates confidence and direction. The man who perpetually half commits and leaves everything open-ended communicates anxiety and avoidance. He sets and maintains boundaries without drama. He knows what he will and won't engage with, and he holds those positions without emotional escalation. His limits don't require negotiation or explanation. They are simply the contours of who he is and how he operates, and he applies them consistently, which makes him readable and trustworthy. He maintains emotional frame. When the emotional environment becomes turbulent, he doesn't become turbulent with it. He remains himself. He can be moved without being swept away. He can acknowledge difficulty without losing his grounding. That capacity to hold the frame when the frame is being tested is what people mean when they talk about emotional leadership. It is not coldness. It is the warm steadiness of a person who has enough internal structure that external chaos cannot collapse it. Leadership reduces emotional ambiguity. This is the direct relational benefit. When a man has these qualities, the woman knows where she stands. The dynamic is legible. There is no constant uncertainty about what he's thinking, what he wants, whether he's committed, which version of him will show up today. He is consistent in the ways that matter. And that consistency, that legibility, allows her to relax in the relationship rather than spending her energy managing its uncertainty. Let's talk about the supply and demand dynamics of this, because they're real and they shape the landscape significantly. Older men who have actually done the work, who have built something with their time and their effort, who carry the qualities we've been describing, are genuinely rare. Not because men can't develop these qualities, but because developing them requires sustained effort over time, and most people take paths of least resistance. The result is that at any given level of the older male population, the genuinely high value ones, the ones who are emotionally regulated and purposeful and capable and clear, represent a real scarcity. Meanwhile, younger ambitious men are abundant. There are enormous numbers of them competing in the same spaces, running similar strategies, offering similar presentations. In a crowded market, scarcity of the real thing commands a premium. The older man who has done the work has, effectively, a lower supply side than the younger man who hasn't had the time to develop what the older man has built. Selectivity increases status. This is the corollary. An older man who is at his level has, typically, more options than he is pursuing. He is not frantically casting a wide net. He is not running high volume, low quality approaches. He is selective, and the selectivity reads as status, not because it's performed as a tactic, but because it's the natural behavior of a man whose time and attention are genuinely valuable. When he gives them, it means something, because the scarcity is real. Emotional stability increases security, and security, as we've established, is what the deep wiring is selecting for. A man who does not need her validation to function, who is not destabilized by her emotional states, who can be a stable presence regardless of what is happening in the relationship surface, dynamics, provides something that is neurologically soothing in a way that goes beneath conscious awareness. Her nervous system settles around him, and that settling feels like safety, like home. The less reactive party controls the frame. This is the power dynamics reality. In any interpersonal dynamic, the person who is less emotionally invested in achieving a specific outcome, the person who can walk away without their world collapsing, the person who is not driven by desperation, that person sets the terms, not through force, through presence, through the gravity of their settled internal state. There's a status projection element to this that works at the social level and compounds over time. Age plus competence projects status automatically, not because age is inherently status conferring. A man who has aged without building anything, who is older and still at the beginning, does not project status. What projects status is the visible evidence of accumulated competence, the professional credibility, the social connections that have depth and history, the reputation that has been built through repeated demonstration rather than a single impressive moment, the material environment that reflects sustained good decision making rather than sudden windfall. All of these things together create a projection that reads instantly and largely unconsciously as high status. The contrast between young flash and mature credibility is significant. Young flash is expensive. It requires constant maintenance. It is not self-sustaining because the signal it's sending is performance rather than substance. Credibility, by contrast, is almost self-sustaining because it is built on actual history, on things that actually happened, on people who actually witnessed them. It does not require performance because the evidence already exists. And this difference in the quality of the signal is perceptible, again, often unconsciously, to the people reading it. Credibility compounds. This is one of the most important features of status, built on real accomplishment rather than performance. Each year that passes, each additional evidence point adds to the structure rather than requiring more resources to maintain the facade. The older man who has done the work gets more credible over time, not less. His social proof accumulates. His professional credibility deepens. His emotional groundedness becomes more pronounced as the experiences that shaped it multiply. The signal gets stronger with less effort required to generate it, loud dominance versus quiet authority. This binary describes the difference between the performance of status and the reality of it. Loud dominance is reactive. It requires an audience. It requires constant reinforcement. It collapses when the audience is absent. Quiet authority is self-sustaining. It does not need to announce itself. It is visible in how a man moves, how he speaks, how he engages with situations that would destabilize someone less grounded, and quiet authority, precisely because it is not performed, registers as more real and therefore more compelling than its loud counterpart. Let's take apart a myth while we're here, because it's worth doing directly. The fun young guy. The narrative that younger men hold the energy advantage in romantic competition, that their vitality, their novelty, their enthusiasm, their willingness to do anything and go anywhere creates a category of attractiveness that older men cannot match. That youth is the trump card. Here's what that narrative gets right. Novelty is real. There is a genuine appeal to newness, to someone who is still discovering themselves, and everything feels like possibility. There is energy in the unexplored, and in the short term being the period before reality sets in, and the actual structural qualities of a person start to matter, novelty and energy are compelling. Here's what it gets wrong. Novelty fades faster than almost anyone expects. The things that made the exciting new experience exciting are definitionally temporary. The unknown becomes known. The possibility collapses into actuality. And what's left is not the idea of the person, but the actual person. And if the actual person is still in the exploration phase, still unsettled, still finding himself, still needing external validation for his self-image, the experience of being with him over time is not the same as the early excitement suggested it would be. Short-term excitement versus long-term structure, and the woman who is making a serious evaluation, who is thinking beyond the initial experience, who is looking for something that holds, rather than something that burns brightly and then requires rebuilding from scratch, is doing that calculation, often without being fully conscious of it. She is evaluating the trajectory, not just the current state. And the trajectory of a man who is already built, who has demonstrated sustained competence and growth over time, is more legible and more trustworthy than the projection of what an exciting younger man might become. Stability compounds. This is the other side of the credibility compounding we discussed. An unstable dynamic requires constant energy to maintain. It is expensive in emotional terms. Every spike of excitement is paid for with a corresponding period of uncertainty or conflict or emotional recovery. Over time, the interest rate on that excitement becomes unsustainably high. Stability, by contrast, builds on itself. The trust that develops in a stable dynamic creates space for deeper vulnerability, which creates deeper connection, which generates a quality of intimacy that the excitement-based dynamic can never sustain. The young guy with all the energy is a temporary advantage. The older man with genuine structural value is a compounding one, and compounding always wins over time. There's an important distinction to make here, and it requires honesty about the range of reasons younger women might choose older men. Because the pattern is not monolithic. Some women are choosing older men for stability in the truest sense, for the emotional groundedness, the decision-making clarity, the reliable presence of a man who has consolidated what he is and where he's going. This is the choice that, when the older man has real character, tends to produce functional and genuinely fulfilling partnerships. Some are choosing for what might be called mentorship energy, for the experience differential, for the access to a worldview that has been shaped by more varied territory. There is genuine intellectual and personal value in that dynamic when it is healthy, when it is two people who find the asymmetry generative rather than limiting. When the older man brings perspective and the younger woman brings the kind of fresh engagement with the world that comes from not yet having all the answers. That exchange, when it's honest, can be profoundly enriching for both. Some are choosing for emotional safety, for the specific relief of being with someone whose emotional world is regulated enough that she does not have to manage it, for the experience of a relationship where her emotional state does not have to calibrate constantly against the instability of her partner's. This is real, and it is valuable, and it is often underestimated as a motivating factor. And some are making a lifestyle calculation, choosing for access to a material environment, a social world, a set of experiences that the older man's accumulated resources make possible. This is the version of the choice that most criticism focuses on, and it is real. It exists. But reducing the entire pattern to this version is like saying people get married for tax advantages. True, sometimes. Not the whole picture. The distinction between lifestyle optimization and genuine compatibility matters, because one of those produces something sustainable, and one of them produces a transaction that will reveal itself as such when the terms shift. If the primary draw is material, the relationship is as stable as the material conditions. If the draw is the actual qualities of the person, the character, the emotional regulation, the direction, the genuine connection, the relationship has something to stand on that survives the fluctuations of circumstance. Know the difference, whether you are in this dynamic or evaluating one from the outside. Honesty requires addressing when this dynamic fails, and it does fail. The presence of age does not guarantee the presence of the qualities that make age valuable. And some age gaps that look functional on the surface collapse for reasons that were visible from the beginning to anyone looking carefully. Age gap dynamics fail most predictably when ego imbalance enters the picture. The older man who is fundamentally insecure, who needs the younger woman's admiration to confirm his value, who chose her youth and availability precisely because it gave him a power differential. He found soothing for his own unresolved insecurities. That man is not operating from the position of genuine confidence and earned stability. He is using the relationship as a mirror, and the dynamic that creates will, over time, produce resentment on both sides. When control replaces leadership, the dynamic becomes destructive. Real leadership, as we defined it, is about providing direction and stability from a place of internal security. Control is about restricting another person's autonomy to manage your own anxiety about losing them. These two things can look similar from the outside at the beginning. They reveal themselves over time. Leadership expands the woman's sense of herself. Control shrinks it. And the older man who is using the power differential of age and experience and resources to constrain rather than elevate, that man is not demonstrating the qualities that made older men attractive in the first place. He's demonstrating insecurity with a power advantage layered on top. When insecurity drives dominance, the age advantage inverts into a liability. Because now, the very things that were supposed to signal security, the resources, the social position, the experience, are being deployed defensively as tools for holding rather than attracting. And a younger woman who is paying any attention at all will feel the difference. The transition from magnetic stability to controlling anxiety is felt before it is understood. And once it's felt, the attraction begins to unravel, regardless of what the material circumstances of the relationship look like. Age without character collapses. This is the clean summary. The age is never the point. The character is the point. And if the character was never there, or was it there and corroded over time under the pressure of insecurity and ego, then what's left is just an older man who has none of the qualities that made the pattern attractive to begin with. And that is not a compelling offer at any age. Here's the synthesis. And it's the most important thing in this entire discussion. It is not the number of years that produces the attraction. It is the accumulated capability that those years, when used well, tend to generate. And that distinction is everything, because it means that chronological age is neither necessary nor sufficient for what we're talking about. A 40-year-old man who has coasted, who has not developed his emotional regulation, who is still in the reactive and validation seeking mode he was in at 25, who has not built genuine competence in any domain, who has not developed the settled identity and clear direction that come from intentional self development, that man does not carry the value signals we've been discussing. He is just older. And older, without the substance, is not more attractive. It is just further along a path that went nowhere particular. Conversely, a man in his early 30s who has used his time with exceptional intentionality, who has developed genuine emotional regulation, who has built real competence in meaningful domains, who has a clear sense of who he is and where he's going, who does not need external validation to sustain his self image. That man carries the qualities that the older man archetype represents. He got there faster because he worked harder and more intentionally at the right things. Older but stagnant versus younger but exceptional. Competence is the variable that matters, not chronology. This reframes the entire conversation. Because if age were the operative variable, the advice for any man who wanted to be more attractive would simply be to wait, to let the years accumulate and trust that they do the work. But that is not how it works. The years only do the work if the man is doing the work within the years. If he is actively building, actively developing, actively processing his experience in ways that produce growth rather than just time served, competence attracts across age. This is the clean principle. Build enough of it in the right areas at any age, and you will produce the kind of signal that we've been discussing: the groundedness, the direction, the emotional stability, the earned confidence that requires no performance, the leadership capacity that reduces ambiguity and creates safety. These things are not reserved for men above a certain chronological threshold. They are the natural output of genuine self development pursued with real commitment over real time. Here's where we close, and it comes back to a simple choice. You can wait. You can tell yourself that the problem is your age, in whichever direction you think the problem lies. You can wait to get older and hope the years change you automatically. You can wait to get the resources that you think are the actual point. You can wait for the circumstances to align in a way that makes you more compelling without you having to change anything about who you fundamentally are. Or you can build. Younger women are not choosing wrinkles. They are not running it toward age for its own sake. They are choosing the things that age often produces: the stability, the clarity, the direction, the settled identity that has been shaped by real experience and real effort, the emotional regulation that comes from having been through enough to know your own responses and manage them, the confident non-neediness that comes from having built enough that your value is not dependent on external confirmation. Those things are buildable right now, at whatever age you currently are. The question is not how old you are. The question is what you're doing with your time and what kind of man that time is producing. Build leverage, real leverage, the kind that comes from genuine competence, from developed skills, from a professional and personal life that has weight and direction to it. Leverage that is visible not because you announce it, but because it is evident in how you move through the world. Build competence in your work, in your relationships, in your emotional life, in your physical presence. Competence in each of these domains compounds. It deepens over time. It creates the kind of multidimensional capability that makes a person genuinely irreplaceable rather than just periodically impressive. Build emotional control, the capacity to feel without being driven by feeling, to be moved without being swept away, to hold your ground under pressure without becoming rigid or cold, to regulate your internal state well enough that the people around you feel safer in your presence. This is the thing that most directly produces what attracts, and it is built through deliberate practice, through choosing your responses rather than defaulting to reactions, through doing the internal work that most men avoid. Stability wins, not as a compromise, not as the consolation prize for men who couldn't compete on excitement, as the actual quality that produces the most durable and meaningful attraction, as the foundation on which everything real is eventually built. That's what this has always been about. Not age, substance. Build enough of it, and the years become evidence rather than waiting.